Alright, today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly heartbreaking journey. We're going to break down the exact chronological sequence of April 14th, 1865, Good Friday, literally hour by hour. This was a day that started with this profound, soaring hope for a nation that had been tearing itself apart, and it ended in one of the absolute most shocking tragedies in American history. So we're going to strip away all the myths today. We'll look at the actual sequence of events, tracking the President of the United States and the man plotting in the shadows as they head on a collision course that would change the world forever. And to really understand it, we actually have to start with this exact line: "You sock-dollarizing old man trap." Now, I know you're probably not rolling on the floor laughing right now, but 160 years ago, this was the absolute funniest punchline in the smash hit play Our American Cousin. The whole setup is this quick-witted American just insulting a really strict English host. But the thing you really need to take away from this seemingly innocent joke is that it served as the fateful, roaring trigger for the tragedy at Ford's Theater. It is, without a doubt, the most consequential punchline in American history. So, picture this. You're in the theater that night. The punchline lands, the 1,700-person audience, which includes the president, just erupts into laughter. Up in the VIP box, Abraham Lincoln is relaxing in this comfortable parlor rocking chair. He's smiling. He's holding his wife Mary's hand. They finally look like they're at peace. But the terrifying part here is the dramatic irony, because just outside that box, celebrated actor John Wilkes Booth is literally waiting in the shadows. He knows his play inside and out. He has been waiting for this exact joke, because he knows that roaring laughter filling up that small theater is going to perfectly muffle the pop of his Derringer pistol. Okay, let's rewind a bit. To understand how we arrived at this terrifying second in time, let's loop back to the morning of that Good Friday and anchor our timeline. Lincoln actually woke up in an unusually cheerful mood. He started his day having breakfast with his oldest son, Robert. And Robert's life is this wild, tragic side story all its own. He was placed in an administrative role under General Grant because, well, the Lincolns had already buried 2 young sons and they just couldn't bear to lose a third. But in this incredibly cruel twist of history, Robert was fated to be at or near the assassinations of 3 U.S. presidents during his lifetime: his father, James Garfield, and William McKinley. So during that morning breakfast, and a later cabinet meeting with General Ulysses S. Grant, the focus was completely on the approaching end of the Civil War. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia had just recently surrendered. But here's the absolutely crucial point. The war wasn't completely over. There were still more than 150,000 Confederate soldiers waiting in the field. Lincoln spent his entire morning trying to navigate the incredibly complex puzzle of how to unite a fractured, post-war nation. Meanwhile, across town, it was the desperate hope of rallying those remaining 150,000 soldiers that was actively spurring John Wilkes Booth into his dark plot. Let's move into the afternoon and watch how this builds. At 3 p.m., Lincoln joins Mary for a private carriage ride to the Navy Yard on the Potomac, which was one of his favorite spots. Mary would later describe her husband's whole vibe during this ride as joyful. She actually said he was almost boyish. And man, that just brilliantly illustrates the tragedy of this day. This incredibly wary president who had endured so much pain was finally looking to the future of his country and his family with this soaring, renewed sense of optimism. But as evening falls, we get this really chilling juxtaposition. At 8 p.m., Lincoln sits down and writes a handwritten note to allow a friend to visit him at 9 a.m. the next morning. It's a man making everyday plans for a peaceful tomorrow. But let's scan across the city. Just an hour earlier, at 7 p.m., Booth is at the Herndon House, which is only 3 blocks from Ford's Theater. He is actively finalizing a 3-headed assassination plot with his co-conspirators. He's literally making sure Lincoln's plans for tomorrow never come to pass. Now, Lincoln decides to attend the theater that night to see Our American Cousin, basically so he wouldn't disappoint the public. It had been widely advertised that General Grant, who was the absolute Union hero of the hour, would be there too. But Grant and his wife Julia actually declined the invitation. Why? Well, they officially said they wanted to visit their children in New Jersey, but historically, it's pretty widely understood that Julia just really wanted to avoid Mary Lincoln, who was famous for having a harsh tongue and throwing public outbursts. And that right there creates a massive historical what-if. If the formidable General Grant had been sitting in that box, would Booth have even succeeded? Which brings us to a massive glaring question. I mean, where were the president's bodyguards? How in the world does the President of the United States get left completely vulnerable in a crowded public theater? The answers reveal this catastrophic series of security failures that practically handed Booth the exact opportunity he was looking for on a silver platter. The sheer contrast between the men tasked with Lincoln's safety is just staggering. On the left, we have Ward Hill Layman. This guy was Lincoln's fiercely loyal, self-appointed bodyguard, a massive, brutal man who was literally known to sleep outside the president's door armed with pistols and a giant Bowie knife. But Lincoln had sent Layman away to Richmond days earlier, so with Layman gone, the job fell to D.C. police officer John Frederick Parker. And Parker was notoriously unreliable. He had a track record of sleeping on duty, visiting brothels, and being drunk on the job. And believe me, Parker's track record absolutely matters here. Parker was the guy assigned to guard the door to Lincoln's box. But at intermission, he just leaves his post. He wanders across the street to the Star Saloon to grab a drink. And unbelievably, Booth had decided to gather his courage before the attack by having a whiskey and water at that exact same salon. Think about that shocking historical twist for a second. The killer and the bodyguard assigned to stop him were drinking in the same bar, just feet away from each other, literally moments before the assassination. So, with the door unguarded, Booth's meticulous infiltration begins. Step 1. He leaves his getaway horse with a stagehand at the rear of the theater. Step 2. He descends a trapdoor and crosses the dark cellar right beneath the stage so he can secretly enter the front lobby. Step 3. He walks right up to the president's only remaining line of defense, a valet named Charles Forbes, and just shows him a card, casually talking his way past him. And Step 4. Booth steps into the outer vestibule and jams the door shut behind him with a piece of wood. The trap is officially set. And so we return to the punchline. Booth waits for the laughter. He steps into the president's box. He aims his Derringer pistol just 9 inches from the back of Abraham Lincoln's head, and he pulls the trigger. A lead ball no bigger than your fingertip smashes into the president's skull, lodging right behind his right eye. The great liberator simply slumps forward. In fact, witnesses actually thought he had just fallen asleep out of boredom. But obviously that illusion of sleep only lasted a second. Immediate chaos erupts. Major Henry Rathbone, who was the substitute guest for General Grant, recognizes the gunshot and instantly charges through the smoke right at Booth. Booth slashes Rathbone's arm all the way to the bone with his Bowie knife. Then, Booth swings his legs over the balcony and leaps to the stage, but he falls awkwardly. His riding spur actually catches on the American flag draped over the box, and he hits the stage hard, breaking his leg right on impact. Rising up on a broken leg in front of this completely stunned audience, and keep in mind, many of them still thought this was just part of the play, Booth shouts a famous, highly theatrical phrase, Sic semper tyrannis. Now, this translates to, thus always to tyrants. It was the official motto of the state of Virginia, and it was a deliberate, chilling reference to the assassination of Julius Caesar. Booth then slashes another actor on stage and just vanishes into the dark alley, escaping on his waiting horse. Back inside the theater, a terrible scream finally breaks the silence, and one of the very first men to spring into action is Dr. Charles Leal. Now, what's just astounding here is that Dr. Leal was only 23 years old. He had literally just received his medical degree 6 weeks prior to this. But this young, barely trained doctor pushes through the panicked crowd and just takes complete charge. He finds the hidden bullet hole, removes a clot to relieve the pressure on Lincoln's brain, and somehow manages to temporarily stabilize the dying president's breathing. As Dr. Leal is working frantically, this emotionally striking and honestly fiercely debated scene unfolds. Actress Laura Keene, the exact woman the night's performance was honoring, enters the box. In her beautiful, flowing stage dress, she reportedly asked to sit on the floor so she can cradle the bleeding president's head in her lap. It so perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of that Good Friday. It's almost like an American Pieta, right? This incredibly jarring image of art and violence just completely colliding in Lincoln's final moments. Now, Dr. Leal knew almost immediately that the wound was fatal, but he also knew Lincoln would absolutely never survive the bumpy carriage ride back to the White House. So, in this incredibly solemn procession, the unconscious president is carried across the street to a boarding house called the Peterson House. And there, his family, his cabinet, and a whole team of doctors gathered in a somber, devastating vigil. They worked through the entire night, but Abraham Lincoln never regained consciousness. The desperate fight for his life ended the very next morning. At exactly 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, surrounded by his loved ones and the leaders of the nation he had fought so incredibly hard to keep together, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath. The room fell completely silent, save for the weeping of Mary Todd Lincoln. And it was right then that Secretary of War Edwin Stanton spoke those legendary words, "Now he belongs to the ages." It's such a profound conclusion to a day that began with immense hope for a united future, only to end in ultimate tragedy. And I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. How often does the entire trajectory of world history pivot on something as incredibly simple as a single unguarded door? Thank you so much for exploring this chronological explainer with me. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.